Not these are, because that's what all we told me, but. Right. Okay, good crowd. Usually this one's a little bit less popular, so I'll try to make it interesting. But thank you very much for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces, so I've met with some of you before. My name's Lauren Watson, who we've not met before. Thank you so much for coming. A lot of times we have the question of how exactly do I kind of sell myself to employers? How do I stand out? Hello, come on in. Would you mind signing in really quick, please? Thank you. And so I really hope this session gives you some ideas. By all means, if you have some perspective to share, if you have either been through an interview process where you really thought that you got some good experience with talking about your skills, or maybe you got some good feedback from an employer, or maybe you did an internship. Hello, come on in. Would you mind signing in, please? No, sorry. Then we'll just kind of talk about maybe some of the experiences you've had as well. So feel free to jump in at any point. This is really just kind of an overview, and I do want to show you some different resources as well, because sometimes part of this step of really marketing those skills is knowing what skills you actually want to talk about. So that takes a little bit of reflection as well. So we'll go through some different things. But I like to always start out with what exactly are the skills that employers are most interested in. We survey them every year across the nation, and we ask them, what kinds of skills are you looking for in your college student applicants? What are some of the top things that you want them to be able to demonstrate to be successful in an internship, an entry-level position? Hello, do you mind signing in really quickly? Thank you. And so this is pretty consistent with what comes up every single year when we survey the employers. And this is pretty much the order that comes up. Usually leadership is the very top skill or very close to the top, as well as teamwork skills, communication, problem-solving skills. The list goes on. So I hope that as you think about the skills that you've gained from your experiences, that you consider really focusing on some of these kinds of skills, knowing that this is really what employers as a whole are focused on. The other thing too is that if you're applying to jobs that interest you, you're going to see a common theme with what they want in their applicants. You might see a lot of job descriptions that are really focused on strong attention to detail, or maybe analytical skills. There could be all different things. So that'll certainly be a good guide for you as well in terms of what skills to think about for your own experiences, as well as skills that you can seek out. So as you look at this list, I kind of want you to just take a moment to think about what are these skills that you see here that you think that come pretty naturally to you, the things that you think, all right, I mean, I think I've got a pretty good handle on this, that is pretty easy for me to do, as well as the things that maybe you don't really feel as confident with. It's not to say that every employer expects you to have all these skills 100% perfectly, and it's just a kind of a starting point for what to think about. But in any case, as you're thinking about the skills that come naturally to you, as well as the things that maybe you want to work on a little bit more, think about them in the context of how you've been developing your different skills. It's easy to think I get business skills in an internship and that's that. But the thing is, you're developing these relevant skills in all different kinds of experiences. You've probably had some sort of either part-time job or volunteer role or athletic experience. Hopefully all of you are looking up here and thinking, yes, I've done at least one or more of these things. And as you think about those experiences, you've made contributions in all of those work environments, volunteer environments, whatever it may be. And what I really challenge you to think about are what are the ways that you brought something to the table? Because everyone has their unique strengths. Everybody has the things that maybe they're not so good at. But as you think about all these different experiences, these are the kinds of things that can come into your marketing efforts as you really try to sell that skill set that you have. And we'll talk more about that later in the presentation. But just make sure that you're not forgetting about all these different kinds of experiences where you've developed your skills, because you've been really growing personally and professionally. in lots of different ways through these different experiences. So that kind of leads then to those guiding questions. Whenever you're thinking about your skills, obviously don't limit it to just technical skills. I mean, it's not that it's not important to be able to use Excel, but the thing that employers stress is it's great if you know how to do a financial report. I am pleased as punch if you can do a thorough marketing consumer analysis, but without these skills that really allow you to successfully navigate those business processes, without these skills, the employers aren't really interested because these really have to be the dominant skills that come out with the way that you do your jobs and your different roles. So by all means, highlight the business skills, the technical skills, but just make sure that these are evident, because if they're not, then employers might not be very interested. So with that said, think about really what comes naturally to you, the things that doesn't take a lot of effort, maybe things you've gotten positive feedback on from others. And then really think about how you make those contributions to the team environment. How do you make it either a more positive group to be with? How do you make it a more efficient place? How do you make it somewhere that really focuses on the goal at hand and not get distracted and stay on task? Whatever it may be, really think about what that means for you, because that's going to be a product of your unique skill set. And then too, like I said, really think about the job description skills that are being asked of you, because that's really going to help you focus on the skills that you highlight throughout the internship and full-time job search process, because that gives you some direction with what employers are really going to be looking for in their candidates. But it's really important that you think about the skills as a big picture process, because employers don't just want to know what skills you've developed. That's great, but they also want to know, what skills do you want to keep building? If I hire you for this internship next summer, what skills are you hoping to get more confident with and more polished with over the next several months? And then once you start the internship, what other skills do you want to keep expanding on, or what new skills do you want to learn? So they really want to know about it as a whole process rather than just single instances or just what you've learned up to this point. Okay. So I'm just curious, based on what we've covered so far, has anyone had any experiences with employers in interviews or career fairs or anything like that where these kinds of skills really came out in the conversation? Either they commented on your resume, or, yeah. Do you want to share a little bit more about that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I had an interview for my internship.
Okay.
For last summer, at a bank, and they really hit almost all of them. They really asked about, in terms of your resume, how they tie into those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Anybody else face anything like that? Well, if you haven't, you will. Okay. The thing I want you to think about too is it's still pretty early in the academic year. So as you think about the skills that you want to develop more, think about what are the opportunities around campus that you can really plug yourself into to develop those different skill sets. Because you might be looking at this list and thinking, well, I really want to be a little bit stronger with risk taking. I feel like I always just play it safe. I don't really strategically think about how to maybe think outside the box or do something that might be a little bit untraditional or unconventional. That's great. So especially if you're looking at positions that require risk-taking skills, what are some experiences either in student organizations on campus or volunteering? What are some of the ways that interest you that you could really sharpen that skill set and then be a newly minted risk taker by the end of this academic year? There's a lot here. That's the nice thing about being at University Park, because there's really nothing that you can't do. There's no skill set that you can't develop. So I do want to show you some resources that can help you take the next steps with those skills. There's endless resources out there. I'm just going to highlight two just to keep it manageable and give you a starting point. But obviously it's important to think about your own skills and what you bring to the table, but then also think about the skills that is being asked of the industry that you're seeking. The first thing I want to show you is the 16 personalities, which I know a lot of you have done for class, but if not, I just want to point that out briefly. With the 16 personalities, it's a free Myers-Briggs type indicator test that you can take. I actually think it's kind of fun. It takes about, what, 20 minutes, I think. And what's nice about it is that once you go through the questions, it gives you your actually 5-letter personality type. One of the sections that it breaks it down into is your strengths and weaknesses that are often associated with that type. So what I think is kind of cool is that you can also jump to one of the personality types if you kind of know what you are. Either you already took the test or you want to read the description and place yourself that way. For the purpose of just thinking about your skills, you can do that. I'm just going to click on the debater. But it's nice because it does kind of give you that profile of how you function and where that falls into your influence and skill set on others. And looking different from when I last saw. Oh, okay, there we go. So it breaks it down into different aspects of, different kinds of environments that you can be in based on your type. And I think that the strengths and weaknesses section is a good thing to pull up when thinking about your skills. Now, obviously, there's more than 16 personality types out there, and by no means should you be boxing yourself into anything. But I think that it's a good exercise to think through based on what type you had in the test or based on what type you most closely associate with. What are some of the strengths and weaknesses that are often associated with that type? And do you see that in yourself? If not, that's fine. But if you do see it in yourself, then what are some examples? If you are in fact a debater, in what ways have you been charismatic in your experiences? How could you bring that to an internship work environment? Or maybe you're thinking, well, actually, I'm not that charismatic. My friends have been very blunt about that. So how do I develop charisma? So you can make it a targeted skill. So I think it's nice to use that as a possible tool to do some reflection. And then the other piece of it, of course, is the skills that are being asked of the industry. So ONET, onetonline.org, is a resource that is put out by the Department of Labor. They update it regularly. And you can do all sorts of searching and exploring on this site. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole with it today, but I think one of the cool things, since we're talking about skills, you can go to the advanced search tool, click on skills, and you can do some exploration. If you want to do the search this way, you can think about some of the skills that you most like to use. So maybe you're someone who says, I'm very social and outgoing. I want to click on that and see what sort of positions I'm kind of being led to as I think about these different skill sets. So you can go down different pathways as you look at the different skill sets, coordination. So I mean, it'll give you some ideas about different occupations, and kind of the flip side with this resource is that it's not necessarily business specific, because there's a lot of different industries represented on here. But nonetheless, it does challenge you to seek out some different career paths that interest you. And then the other way too is that you can backtrack into it to say, all right, well, I want to be an accountant. So then you can see what skills are associated with accounting, and then go in and ask yourself, all right, how am I doing in these skill areas that one would need to be successful in the accounting industry? What are the skills that you're doing pretty well with? What are the ones that you need some work with? What are the ones that you had no idea you should even consider for being an accountant? So I think it's kind of nice to use as kind of an overall connecting the dots tool. As you can see, you can also search by different knowledges and interests and different kind of work environments and work values. We're always talking about work values. So I just like to point out those couple resources to start out. Does anyone know of any other resources that have kind of helped you assess different strengths and skills? Anything else that's been helpful for you? No? All right. Well, those hopefully will be a good starting point for you. I think they're both pretty cool resources. They're both free. You don't have to even worry about Penn State login or anything. The other thing I want to point out when we're talking about developing skills is the new LinkedIn Learning, which used to be the lynda.psu.edu for those of you who were here last year. This is a really great free online database that walks you through trainings of all different kinds of topics. So if you remember the Linda version, it's the same thing, only much more user-friendly. So I wanted to pull that up really quick too, because the thing is, you might be thinking, all right, I'm seeing a lot of internships that interest me and everybody says they want Access skills, but I've never used Access and I don't know if I'm gonna get to use it in my classes all that much. So how can I develop that skill set? So if you go to LinkedIn Learning, psu.edu, log in with your web access. That's going to make me do more stuff. How come? When I'm using my work computer, it doesn't ask me this, so sorry about that. Okay, there it is. So if there's something really specific you want to look up, you could, let's say, just use that Access example. You can do keyword search. 29,000 results. Okay, that's a little too much. Obviously, they're not all going to be exactly what you want. But you can filter it down further. You can pull up the newest ones if you want to look at it that way. If you want to narrow it down more by how long the sessions are, you can filter it that way. So you could even get more specific, well, what kind of functions within Access do you want to look up? I think though, especially with the way it is now with lynda.psu.edu, the keyword search I think was probably the best way to explore. But I think that with the new LinkedIn Learning, they have it broken down so nicely for browsing. So you can even focus on skills based on whether it falls in that bucket of business skills, creative skills, technology skills, and you can pull up the different softwares that are associated with business or different subjects associated with business. If you want to learn certain technology skills, SQL, Minitab, I mean, there's just so much on here. What's nice too is that there's different learning paths. So if you actually wanted to challenge yourself to dig deeper into a certain business topic, you know, maybe you're interested in being a manager, you can do a 5-hour tutorial broken down most likely. I can't sit in front of a computer for 5 hours, but you can do some longer training sessions. And then once you're done with the learning paths, a lot of them will give you an informal certification or badge to go along with it, and that's something that you can put on your resume. So I think it's a nice way to seek out the things that you want to learn, or if you just want to be better with, other kinds of interpersonal skills or leadership skills, or I mean, there's just endless stuff on here. So I encourage you to use this as a resource to explore some skill areas that you want to capitalize on more, especially if you're looking at job descriptions and there's a skill area that keeps coming up and you're not really sure how to build on that skill area. By all means, you can seek out the organizations and whatnot, part-time jobs, endless possibilities, but I think this is a really nice tool to use as well. There's so much on there, different topics. Okay. Any thoughts or questions so far? Okay. So then that brings us to, all right, this is all great, but how exactly do I articulate it? I want to get a good internship, so how do I take all these skills that I've been using and want to use, and then how do I really communicate it? So we'll go through most of these. Some of them are a little bit more ambiguous, like the casual conversations with employers and alumni. There's not a formula for a conversation per se, but I hope that by going through some specific recommendations for the others that you can get some ideas on how you could have the more informal delivery of different skill sets. So let's start with a couple true or false questions. Every resume should have a skills section. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I want you to think, is this true? Every resume should have some sort of skills section. Generally, what we recommend, false, because your bullet points are going to be an even better representation of your skills than a skills section. The skills section is really good to indicate language skills. It's a good space to put something like a Linda or a LinkedIn Learning certification that you've completed. But as far as the I'm a good communicator, I'm organized, those other soft skills, it will carry so much more weight if you go into detail in your bullet points on your resume that explain, here's how I've been organized. Here's something that I've actually organized. Here is something that I've had to communicate with coworkers or clients or customers or whatever. So we'll go into more detail with that. But sometimes I get the question, well, wait, what do I put in my skill section then? Like, we're not going to have a skill section. You're going to put all your skills in your bullet points. So just something to think about, because a lot of samples have them. You're going to get all sorts of recommendations with it. But my recommendation and that of a lot of Business Career Center coaches is a lot of times you don't need one because the skills are coming out in the bullet points instead of their own section out of context. What about hardworking? In an interview, you share, why should you hire me? Well, I'm very hardworking. Or you're talking to an employer, that's one of the things you highlight about yourselves. Is it a skill? You could argue that hardworking is work ethic, that could be a skill. However, what the trap you don't want to fall into is just leaving it at that. Because what does that mean? If you say you're hardworking, like, well, hardworking to me might be very different from hardworking to you. And what is it that you've done that makes you hardworking? That's kind of the general, I have a good work ethic, that's a starting point, but what skills have you used that show that you are hardworking? So just something to think about. The more specific you can be about those general interpersonal skills, the more you're going to be able to convince the employer that you have the skills that they're looking for. Because if it's too vague, like hardworking, they don't really understand what you bring to the table because that can mean a lot of different things. So getting back then to what that means for the resume, all these things could mean hardworking technically. You could say, well, I'm very hardworking because I'm someone who has supervised students and I've mentored and managed people or projects and I've been organized. So just something to think about, the more specific you can be, the better. So with the bullet points on the resume, as you've probably learned, it's important to have a strong action verb at the beginning of each bullet because that action verb ideally is going to be a skill-based verb. So if you are saying that you have good analytical skills, it really helps if you have a bullet that says analyzed, blah, 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 analyzed database of 1,000 clients to assess effectiveness of new strategy or whatever. So that's why you really want to line up the job description and your resume next to each other to see if the skills that they're asking for in the job description are in fact very clearly reflected on your resume. Because when employers are going through resumes quickly, they want to find those skills, they want to see what matches up as quickly as possible. And if all the bullets start out with things like assisted with, worked with, helped, that's really vague. That kind of gets back to that hardworking example. It's like, well, what does that mean? Then they have to keep digging deeper to try to figure out what that means, and that takes more time. And when they're going through hundreds of resumes, sometimes they're like, you know what, this is taking me too long to figure out, on to the next one. And I don't want anyone's resume to get filtered out because of something that can be addressed in advance. And one of the ways you can do that is really make those bullet points as skill-based as possible, starting with strong action verbs whenever you can. So that's just a general tip with how that can come out on the resume. And just making sure those bullet points when you're talking about the skill, if you're talking about that you provided customer service, okay, that's good. I can see that you're talking about your customer service skills, but what did that look like? So did you wait up to 25 tables during the peak dinner hour in a fast-paced work environment, responding to directions from multiple managers and consulting with team members in an environment with demanding customers? I don't know. But the more you can go into detail about how that skill helped you to be successful in those different environments, then the more that shows the employer that you have that skill and that you are prepared to use that skill again in similar environments. So some examples of the bullet points, we won't go through each of these, but someone wanted to show their leadership skills. So they talked about how they led a brainstorming sessions to generate ideas for new innovative fundraising events. And then they talked about the result, which is also very important, resulting in 2 new initiatives raising $2,000 for the club. Second person wanted to talk about their public speaking skills, so they said that they presented a workshop. The last one, they wanted to focus on those marketing skills, so they talked about how they analyzed target market characteristics. So just all things to think about. Thoughts or questions on the resume and how the skills can come out on that document? Okay. All right, with cover letters, we could do a whole other session on that. I don't know if any of you attended the cover letter session earlier this week, so I'm not going to dive into that, but just thinking about how the cover letter can be a really good spot to expand on skills, since the cover letter is not just repeating your resume, and it's not just talking about you in a vacuum, it's talking about how you're a good fit for that particular position with that particular company. It's also a sample of your writing skills. And that's why it's so important to not have any grammar or spelling mistakes, because it tells them, one, you don't necessarily have the best writing skills, and two, that you don't pay close attention to detail. You might say on your resume, I have excellent attention to detail, but if there's some mistakes, I'm like, well, they missed those details, so I don't know. But in addition to being a sample of the writing skills, it's nice because your cover letter is your free space to break down different experiences or skills however you want. If someone's really starting from scratch with a cover letter and they say, I don't even know where to start, I usually say, all right, think about these two possible ways to get started. One approach could be look at the job description and see what are the top 2 to 4 skills that are being asked of for the applicants, and dedicate a paragraph to each one of those skills, talking about how you've used it in your experiences. Or if it makes more sense for you, given what you're applying for and what your experiences are, dedicate a paragraph to 2 to 4 top experiences that were really strong experiences for you, and talk about what skills you used in those different experiences. I mean, there's lots of different ways cover letters can go. There's not a rigid formula, but if you're looking for a way to start, or if you're doing an overhaul with your cover letter, making it very skills focused, that's usually a pretty effective approach, because it makes it very clear to the employer, this is why I'm a good candidate for this position. I like to recommend the highlighter strategy when you're lining the job description up next to the cover letter or resume. Use a highlighter, pick out those top skills that you see, and then line it up next to your resume or cover letter and highlight them there. And if there's a major mismatch between how much is highlighted in the job description, focusing on certain skills compared to your own application materials, then you can probably go back to your own materials and try to either reframe the way that you talk about something or focus on something completely different. Or if you really don't have that skill set, go out and get it somehow. Use LinkedIn Learning or seek out the experiences that'll help you get better in those skill areas. And also the elevator pitch. That short introduction, there's only so much that you can get out, and it's just starting that conversation, of course. And skills are one of the many things that are going to come up in that brief introduction about yourself. Certainly, the employer just wants to get an idea of, who are you, what's the snapshot, what are you studying, what are you interested in, what kind of classes are you taking, why are you interested in this company, in this position, what kind of experiences have you had that would make you successful in this role. And then skills will certainly come into that. The more you know about what the company is looking for and what the postings are asking for, the more you can focus on those skills. You can kind of be a talking cover letter in some ways to really highlight those connections between you and the position. If nothing else, you can talk about the skills that you want to gain in the internships that they have, the skills that you've been building, just making sure that you're not just saying, here's all the stuff I've done, but what was the takeaway? Why were these experiences valuable to you? What have you gained from these experiences that you could apply to the internship? And then what additional skills do you want to keep learning in the internship or full-time job? So just kind of treating it as a piece of the larger picture. Thinking about then how is that elevator pitch broken down. The skills could come out in different parts of the conversation, but I really think it comes out whenever you're talking about those experiences you've had and how those experiences tie into what you're applying for. Because again, it's great if you've done this, 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 and this, but unless you can tell me what sort of interests and skills or common themes behind those experiences that relate to what you're applying for, then it's harder for the employer to make that connection. it's always about making a case and really just making it as clear as possible. Here's why my candidacy lines up with what you have. So the elevator pitch is another way that you can do that. That could also be a whole other session, so we'll just brush the surface with that. And then the interview is also a place where that can come out. So the STARS model, you've probably heard about this as well. But this is a really good way to address skills in an interview, but also maybe even a networking situation too. Because whenever people want to hear about the different scenarios where you've used your skills, this is a good framework to just make sure that you're touching on all the most important parts. So a lot of you have learned this either through the 1897 or you will, or different places we talk about this for sure. But it's nice because you can think about scenarios that speak to different skills, and then you can kind of have a bank of stories going into interviews, a bank of stories that could speak to lots of different skills and lots of different scenarios. And that way, when you go into the interview, you don't have to worry about trying to anticipate every question and trying to memorize all 100 most commonly asked questions and making yourself crazy with what are they going to ask. Instead, you can say, all right, I've got some really good STAR story examples that can speak to the top skills that I want to highlight. And regardless of what they ask me, regardless of what tell me about a time questions they throw at me, I'm going to have some really good stories that can speak to different skills. So it's a good framework, especially if you really focus on how you use that skill to bring about a positive result. Don't ever forget that reflection piece. I know sometimes you hear about that last R, sometimes you don't, but the reflection piece is really the story behind that skill you used. What was your takeaway from that situation? What can you bring to similar situations in the future? So that's one way to think about it. And then two, I mean, you're going to get interview questions. What are your top 3 strengths? You can certainly make that skills focused and focus on maybe some of the skills that came out in the job description that you are prepared to talk about. Those are just some ideas for the interview scenario. But overall tips, hopefully as we're going through these, you're kind of hearing the theme about, all right, first of all, don't be too vague. Really focus on what you did. It's easy to sell yourself short and focus on, well, here's what the team did. This is what this organization does. And it could be interesting background, but employers really want to know, I'm not hiring that whole organization. I'm not hiring the whole group that you did your project with. I want to hire you. If I hire you, what should I be visualizing you doing in your past experiences that tells me that you're going to be successful if I hire you to do a similar set of responsibilities in this position? So just make sure you're always making it clear what you did, but also with that comes the why. Has anyone read the book by Simon Sinek, Start With Why? It is a great book. I really recommend it. I'm probably one of your faculty members who will recommend it at some point before you graduate, but it's called Start With Why. And kind of the driving phrase behind that is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So as you're talking about your skills and the things that you want to accomplish in the positions that you're applying for, it's really kind of bland to just say, I've done this, or I want to do that. Unless you explain, this is the story behind that, this is why I have used these skills before, this is why I want to continue developing this skill set, this is why this matters to me, why this interests me, then it's really kind of, it doesn't really give the employers a chance to learn about you if it's just a bunch of what's without the why behind it. So that's important to keep in mind too. But with that, as I've been saying throughout the presentation, it is part of the larger picture. So along with that why, bring it all together. Why does this all matter? What skills do you want to develop in the future? What are you going to bring with you? What have you learned in the past? Making it more of a holistic discussion. But also, as you think about the skills, make it part of your brand. I mean, you've been talking about brand in class, and it's something that comes up a lot probably, but think about the skills that you bring to the table as part of your brand. Whenever people first think of you, even if they've only met you for 5 minutes, what are the things about you that stood out to them? And is that reflecting the skill area that you want people to associate with you? Or do you need to be more intentional about how you really kind of package the skills that you want to highlight to others? Just all things to think about. So I threw a lot at you and I've done a lot of talking. You're very quiet. But is there anything that you wanted to comment on, any thoughts, questions, concerns, stories. Everyone's like, I'm so tired from exams. I just had a million and I have many more. All right. Well, if you find yourself thinking, okay, that